Hello, Lou Hamilton from Audible Elegance of Cincinnati, Ohio. I have a store on Montgomery Road across from Montgomery Cyclery. And we do work on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And if you can, please do subscribe. It helps us improve our channel and build it. I thought I would talk about selling your used gear. And because we're often asked with our consignment shop to sell their consigned goods, and there's people who want to do it on their own, and there's people we simply don't see. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about that tonight. Given that this format is international, please understand that my experiences are limited strictly to the United States. I'm not aware of the rules and regulations of shipping companies and such around the world, or what services are available to you. So I'll talk about the United States. And if you're looking to sell something, there are some really important factors before you can even begin to establish its value. One is the original manufacturer's box, the owner's manuals, remotes, preferably, where the batteries haven't corroded and destroyed the remote, and that the unit is in good condition and clean. There are some customers who will require that it comes from a pet-free or smoke-free home. And we'll get into that in a second, but that's the beginning footprint. From there, you can begin to look at various sources that are available on the web to sell, to begin to understand what your product might be worth. And the reason I say might is that the value of anything rises and falls for a number of different reasons, including the season. Snowboards don't fetch a whole lot of money in the middle of summer. And during the summer, most people are outdoors, and so indoor activity items like hi-fi or home theater really have a very small buying audience at that point. And so you got to keep that in mind when you're trying to think about values. The different sites have different fees. Some of them have a requirement that you give them X amount of dollars so that you can, in fact, list. Your listing will last 30 days, maybe 60 days. That fee is consumed, and you have to re-fee again. They'll also take a percentage of the selling price, and it varies from organization to organization. So you got to think about that as well. You have to understand that when you take an item to sell, you're entering the domain of what I call a commodity item, in that it's valued as such as opposed to its utility value. And the best way I can explain that is you can take a 39-cent screwdriver that you don't care about, but if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you need a screwdriver, well, $20 seems pretty cheap. So there's the difference between commodity and utility value. Buyers typically are looking at it as a commodity, not as a utility. You got to keep that in mind as well. Now, regardless of what channel you use to sell the product, one of the things you're going to need to do is take a lot of pictures. Front, back, side, tops. In particular, if there are any scratches or imperfections in the labeling, those have to be specifically photographed. If you don't do that, you run the risk of the buyer receiving the product and objecting to what they've received. These organizations have different methods of how they try to resolve it for the benefit of the buyer. Um, some organizations will freeze your money, so you don't get it, and at the same time make you responsible for paying for the return shipping of that item. And we'll get to the importance of that area in a moment. So you really want to reveal everything about the product itself. And at that point, when you're talking about revealing it in photographs, you also reveal whether it's from a smoke-free home, pet-free home. That can or cannot be a really major issue. I remember one time I sent a piece into Rotel for service, and at that point in time, they were not sending the exact units back that you sent in, and I received back for a customer a unit that was very heavily smoked. And that created a mess for me between me and the customer. We got it resolved, but you have to understand that can be an issue with your buyer. Now, you also need to reveal any peculiarities or inconsistencies or imperfections electronically about the product. You know, sometimes it does this and sometimes it doesn't do that. Well, you got to tell the person who's looking to buy this thing. And yes, it's going to affect your value. But if you don't, and that problem erupts, typically within the first 30 days of the buyer receiving it, trust me, you're going to get it back, and you're going to eat it, and you're going to pay for the return shipping. So it's not worth being cute, as I would call it, about what you're doing. Now, if you're going to sell something and you do not have the original factory carton, in the United States, one of the things you have to be aware of is that common carriers will not honor freight damage claims. And this all arose out of people, packing, let's say, amplifiers in a box full of peanuts, which was wholly insufficient, it being damaged, and then, the seller or buyer claiming, freight damage, and the shipping company, the handler that looks at it and goes, this was doomed when it was put in the box. We're not going to pay for it. So you got to be very aware that your original factory carton is really critical. And the more valuable the item, the more critical it becomes. Now, some people have wanted us to take customers' consignment items and take it over to a UPS or FedEx store to pack it. And honestly, folks, they're going to use peanuts. And you're going to wind up with the same goo. Now, in those cases, if it's insured because they packed it, the insurance is actually coming out of the store or the place that actually packed it. It's not coming out of FedEx or UPS. It's actually the store's insurance. Now, whether they'll pay for it or not, I don't know. I don't like going there with that idea. Now, if you still want to ship your item and you don't have the original factory packing, I have a few tips. Number one is use a new box. Go to Lowe's, go to Home Depot, go someplace and buy a brand new box. The heavier the item, if you go over, say, 5 or 7 pounds, you really should get a heavy-duty box because it will take the abuse. The use of used boxes that have already been stressed and not properly sealed is just asking for it. And when I'm saying properly sealed, you're not only talking about the main seam down the middle of the box, but also the ends, because that adds to the structural capability of the box to withstand things. And what you're working against are the gods of the conveyor belts. And your box could be dropped 5, 10, 15, 20 feet from the conveyor belt, and it's got to withstand that drop. In the case of the postal system, they use conveyor belts, and as the conveyor belt just dumps it into, a dumpster, and your box may be 5 pounds, but the next box coming through may be 50. So your box has got to be able to handle that the drop of something very heavy onto yours. So I never use peanuts. No. Now, what I will use, and you can buy this at Lowe's or Home Depot again, is there's a board they basically call Formula. And it's not styrofoam. Styrofoam is a lousy packing material. It'll fracture and break up very easily. These Formula boards are what are used to insulate homes. They come in various thicknesses of 1, 1.5, 2 inches. And depending upon the size and the weight of what you're shipping, you're going to adjust accordingly with the Formula boards. They're 4x8 sheets. My recommendation is to get a T-square used for cutting drywall. Cut the Formula boards to make a really good packaging material. Bottom, the sides, and the top. What's really important is as you pack this and secure the item, you want to make sure that the item itself cannot move. You want to have it firmly locked in place, much like the packing material you got when you originally bought the unit. It's not able to slide around or bang around. That way, you don't have the inertia of the weight of the product taking both the packaging and potentially the box apart. Using quality tape is fine. If you use something like duct tape in order to try to make it really strong, keep in mind that duct tape will easily roll up on cardboard. It's not a good packing tape unless you use clear packing tape over it on both sides of the edges so it doesn't roll up. Duct tape is really good for a lot of things. It's good for strength. But against being rolled, if you put a piece of it on cardboard and you roll your hand against it, you'll see it roll up on itself. And then you lose all the advantages of its strength and actually becomes a liability. So those are some of the tips about selling things. The value you ask for, again, you can do your market research on that. We do market research when we're going to sell things. We look at the season, we look at the condition, and we set it from there. Now, here's the fun part. If you have what I would call a more audiophile type product, the most nightmarish ones for us are audio research or vacuum tube, high-end gear. Be prepared for a lot of questions. Be prepared to having them ask you to take the top off and take photographs of the inside so that they can be sure that it hasn't been modified or altered. We had a couple pieces of audio research where it got down to the point where they wanted us to look at certain resistors on the board and tell them what value it was because there were different generations and that would tell them what generation it was and all that. So you may get away with 2 or 3 people asking a few questions. You may have someone ask you 20, 30, 40 questions. So you better be prepared for that. And also, after all of those questions, they're saying, well, I'm really not interested then. And you have to do it again for the next person. So it's not a cakewalk in trying to sell used things. But if you do sell something, then make sure you pack it right, because there's no sense in selling something if it's going to come back damaged, and that's what you're going to have.